Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast, where we talk about software engineering in the enterprise. Today's topic, security.
Dude, really? Really? You thought that was going to be cool? Yeah, that was a little bit tacky, wasn't it? Hey, it's the best I got today. Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast, where we talk about software engineering and enterprise testing, continuous performance, observability, and now security. That's the topic of today's show. And my next guest is somebody who I've actually known for probably over 20 years now. He's been a personal friend, an employee, a business partner, a client of mine, and once again now sort of a business partner. And he is a person who I inherently trust when it comes to all things security related, because he also has a performance engineering background as well. So mucho respect. Today we're going to ask the question, can performance software also be secure software, and do they have to be mutually exclusive? I've had some comments from people talking about how when developers write code, they don't always start off writing that code with performance or security in mind, but more functionality. But then technical debt builds up when they have to go back and put those elements and those characteristics into their code, performant code, secure code. And on my side of the consulting fence, it's about finding those issues as early as possible to relieve those performance bottlenecks, hopefully when the features are first being created. However, on the security consulting side, they face that same sort of dilemma of, hey, you could find this stuff as early as possible in the software development lifecycle. And we also need to check for this as a integration style type test where we test everything. So security penetration testing, it has its own life cycle too. So I wanted to talk to somebody who's been on both sides of those fences, and we're going to talk to Ron Foster of Saltworks today. Let's bring on Ron. Hello, Mr. Ron Foster. Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast. It's so great to have you today.
It's great to be here.
I'm glad that you made time for me. We have been personally friends that I know of for over 20 years. We've worked together in various capacities, so that we could take up a whole show on how we've worked together and how we know each other. But why don't you just briefly introduce yourself to our audience and what you do today and your background in performance?
I'm an old Unix nerd, first of all, so I kind of go back to that. And there was a time where Unix ruled the world, but in where I lived, that kind of stopped. And then I had to figure out something else. I met you, and you were like, "Hey, do you want to break stuff, specifically Windows stuff, and get paid to do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." And that kind of began my journey into performance engineering. And we had a lot of fun with Load Tester and all the HP Discover kind of era of things and all that type of stuff. And then there just kind of came a point where, other things were kind of knocking at me and saying, "Hey, there's some other places out there too, and you're so broad, security may be calling you." And I kind of just made the leap, and I've never looked back. And it's been great, and I enjoy it. I still deal with functional testing and some performance stuff and just everything else, because I kind of just work within the software development lifecycle itself, and everything now is just about shifting left and trying to get it as early in the pipeline as we can. So being in security, but also understanding all the performance and functional and all the pieces and how they go together, it kind of just, kind of puts me in a great spot to be able to kind of look at the whole thing holistically and help you move your organization where you want to be.
I think it's interesting that you moved over from automation of just the general quality, functional performance, configuration management stool, and then you jump into security. You're still doing that whole cycle, that life cycle, but you're doing it within the security realm. And I think that's interesting, and I think the performance stuff kind of prepares you for that. And there's a lot of similarities between performance and security in that you're recording a script for a load testing tool. It's basically using a proxy and sniffing traffic and creating, function calls for you. When you're security penetration, you're doing something very similar. So, there's some comparable skill sets there. And that's kind of where I want to go with this episode is that it seems like there is a constant struggle between making software perform and making software secure. And the question it comes up all the time, well, can what's the best performant code? What's the best performance site? What's the most security that you can get? And when people ask me that question, like from a performance engineering standpoint, if I put on that hat and that's all I think about, okay, I'm going to give you the most performant website you can get. It will be a straight static HTML page with one tag in it, HTML/HTML. That's all you get. And in fact, if we just decide not to create the website, that'll be the fastest one that we do. Now, that's obviously to the extreme, but when you got that engineer hat on, that's where you start, and then it just is going to get worse from there. You feel the same way on the security side?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want any inputs. If you got to put a page there, I just want to look at it. I don't want any inputs. I don't want any way for a user to interact with your application. I don't want you to cache anything. I don't want anything to happen. I just want you to feed me stuff and feed me new stuff every time, and that is all. That's it. And
all encrypted and
all
unintelligible.
I don't want a back end. I want it to live in memory. I mean, I just, it's just kind of where I want it to be. I want nothing. So
to you, a form field entry is a threat.
It is.
It's an attack vector is all it is.
That's all it is.
So that's really interesting. So what kind of conversations are you having now when you're coming into new clients and they're needing this penetration testing, and then they start running up against the common things, that you start bringing to them saying, did you see this? I mean, what kind of struggle do you see between the developers trying to make this thing secure and getting the code out the door?
But, a really easy button is back to the caching thing. So, I mean, we know from a performance standpoint, we want to cache things. We don't want to be calling those objects every time, because when we do that, it slows things down. We got to pull all that data, and we don't want that. We want as much stuff as we can that's going to remain pseudo static to live, in your machine. So we don't have to pull that down. Security folks, we don't want you to cache anything. So, I mean, and we want you to have headers. We want you to have the Pragma no cache headers. We want you to have content security policy set. We want all these things to say you can't do that. And then we want to restrict where you can call scripts from and everything else. So as soon as we start doing that, developers are like, whoa, well, you're making our apps. We can't do that. It's going to slow everything down. So that's already the first conversations you end up having with developers when you're dealing with someone who has kind of an immature security program and they're just making a stab at it for the first time.
So when we talk about like just the caching issue, I mean, as a performance engineer, I'm going to recommend that you have a CDN somewhere and that you're using something like Cloudflare, Akamai. And again, that's an attack vector for you, especially if they don't implement it right. So how does one at the company level make the decision on where to draw the line? Is it just where their risk tolerance is and they call the shots, or their best practices around that?
That really is what it comes down to. Outside of a performance level, to segue to another type of vulnerability, because it's easier to explain that one. When you're doing HTTP calls, we use verbs, get, post, et cetera, and no matter what kind of scanning tool you're using, is the options header. So, an options tells us what verbs your web server accepts, and most scanning tools are going to call that a critical or a high or something like that. But in reality, any tester worth their salt is going to test every verb on every request they make. So they're going to figure out really quickly what your web server, accepts and doesn't, accept. So then from a business standpoint, you have to just figure out, what's the risk in regards to leaving options on? Only thing we're doing is telling you, what do we allow for verbs? Like I said, every tester, if they're good, is going to go ahead and try all those anyway. So is it truly a risk? It is, but it kind of isn't at the same time. And it's up to the organization to figure out, hey, for whatever it is, whether it's caching, what am I caching? And, is it risky to cache those types of things? So you have to assess all that. I kind of tell folks, as bad as, you hate, maybe certain references, Fox News is an organization that has a logo of a "we report, you decide." And that's kind of what security folks are. We're just here to tell you, hey, we found this, but it's up to you as a business to figure out, is this a risk that either I can remediate, I can absorb, and if I can't do either of those, how do I insure the risk? And those are kind of your pathways to figure out, how do I deal with the risk?
I mean, I can see a parallel there when I am in front of decision makers about performance, you get this result, you can still roll the code out if you want to, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a global outage about 30 minutes later because you're going to be overrun with requests. You're going to have a Taylor Swift moment. You're kind of the same way in that, you can do this, but you may be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal next week, with a hack and lawsuits and all that stuff. So it's even more serious for what you do.
It is. It is more serious. And I just saw in the news yesterday that they said that over the next 2 years, the risk of a major cyber attack because of all the things going on in the world, just the instability is extremely high. It's like 80%, something of that nature. So a lot of companies are thinking about, well, how do I somehow protect my business from that risk, or how do I deal with that risk? So there's a lot of people that are, right now really thinking about how do I do that? And that's why security is kind of a hot industry. I'm kind of glad I got into it, when I did about, 10, 12 years ago, because, it was a good move. And I enjoyed the performance testing. And back to what you were saying minutes ago, how many times when I was in the thick of that, were we working in engagement and the customer decides they're going to change the service level agreement in the middle to get it out the door? And you still see that in the security world. It's like, hey, I have a compliance organization that I'm beholden to. Do I want to really fix this thing, or do I want to check a box? And there's a lot of
checking the box. There's a lot of checking the box, man. Yeah. So now that you're in this new space, it's not new for you, but what's the low hanging fruit that you find the most when you go out there? Is there a common thing that you see that most people are just ignoring, that they should be getting, that's basic 101, or is it real hard to find stuff?
No, it's always headers. You go into an organization, I don't know of any organization that I've really dealt with where you don't go in and you don't see that they're not dealing with caching, or that they're telling you what exactly the type of server they're running. Yeah, I'm running IIS and I'm running IIS 6, or I'm running Apache and I'm running Apache specific version. So they're always doing some type of information disclosure. They're always telling you what type of technology they're using, and often they're not doing anything dealing with caching, with clickjacking, cross-frame stuff, doing anything to mitigate cross-site scripting. And we have headers in modern browsers to deal with a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of browsers try to handle it anyway, but still, I don't want to depend on a control in a browser. I really want to try to build this security in as much as possible.
Oh, absolutely. And getting back to the question about can secure code still be performant codes? Can it still be fast code? We've had a conversation around CSP's, content security policies, and other than slowing down the developers having to go back and redo some work and slowing down the pipeline a little bit, that stuff can still be fast. You just have to think of it ahead of time and put it in. Or does it really slow stuff down?
It really doesn't slow stuff down. It just changes, it's kind of like putting an asterisk where, hey, I can pull scripts, I can pull data from anywhere, and it makes me think about where can I pull data from? How do I cache things, and, making a list of those things and making sure that wherever I'm aggregating that data from and feeding it to a client like a browser, that it's done in a secure way.
You guys at Saltworks, you're a partner with Micro Focus, the Fortify on-demand stuff, right?
We are.
Is that right? And there's a true client implementation just for that product. Is that right?
Web Inspect. So Web Inspect is, it's a enterprise security scanning product. It's really cool. It's probably one of the best one out there. There's lots of great ones. Burp Suite has a great one. Web Inspect's a great one. AppScan's still a player out there. There's a lot of great scanners. But one of the unique things is they do borrow from that load runner technology. So if you've been scripting in load runner and use TrueClient, their TrueClient has been ported over to Web Inspect. You'll see here, you'll even go and you'll see the init sections where you have, your init and your run, and then your end portion of your init of your scripts, like you would have, running a load runner script. But they don't do anything, of course, in the Web Inspect version. But it's the same tech that they've brought over there.
You'd shared something with me that I'm actually going to put a link on this particular episode on the smcjournal.com site, because there's, in that particular TrueClient, there's a way to not bypass but work with MFA, with multi what is it, multi-factor authentication, where you can get around getting the code and get your automation done. It's not that you're necessarily trying to hack it, but some customers just won't take that MFA down for you, even in development. So you have to work around that. Is that right?
That's true. Basically, they're giving you a way to virtualize, some type of Android instance or something like that. So you send your standard MFA that would use, whether it be email or text or whatever, and the true client portion interacts with that to pull that information out and fill in the blanks in the login macro that's being built there with the true client portion, and be able to handle that multi-factor authentication.
That's cool,
So
because
it's really cool.
Micro Focus is the major sponsor, or one of the major sponsors of this program. So thank you, Micro Focus. So tell me, Ron, about Saltworks and how you got involved with them and what you do there.
Micro Focus bought out portions of HP. So you had HP, then you had HPE, and then Micro Focus came in and bought things out. And how it is in consulting, when you see things shifting, sometimes you feel like I need to shift with them. And there were some folks that shifted out, and a few years later, they kind of started Saltworks. And before it was over with, someone pinged me and they're like, "Hey, why don't you come back to this side of the house and join some of your buddies over here?" And that's what I did. And that really the focus of them was to the whole shift left thing. One of the things that early on they were very successful with is taking pipeline integration into scanning. So I mean that was a big deal. So getting your static code analysis, getting your dynamic testing, even getting your open source scanning all done in your pipeline. And you'll see lots of tools out there now. You'll see like Sneak's a big one right now, and Sneak does a lot of static stuff, and it's cool, but it doesn't handle dynamic well. So that's where we step in, and we can help you build the entire end-to-end scenario, static, dynamic, and open source, and make sure all that's integrated into your pipeline.
So be honest, what do you like best? Performance testing and performance engineering, or security engineering?
In performance, you're breaking stuff. That's really what we do. But it's a controlled breakage. We're trying to figure out, hey, is this a network issue? Is it a code issue? Is it a hardware issue? And how do we scale this? Do we scale it vertically? Do we scale it horizontally? And stuff like that. And security, we don't really care about any of that. We just want to break it. And because of that, it's a lot more fun in a lot of ways, and it gives you a little more license in how you do things. I mean, how many times back in the day were you on a load runner engagement and you were in load runner and you say, "Hey, I want to uncheck all the Java stuff," and I bypass that. I don't care about the Java controls. I just want to get the HTTP request, the raw request, and push that through. But what you didn't realize is there was a Java control there, a JavaScript that was a gatekeeper. And next thing you know, you trashed the database because you blew through the control that was there, and stuff like that happened. So so like you mentioned earlier, living in a proxy back then, that was kind of a bad thing. We didn't want to do that. Now I look for that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. So it's fun stuff, and parts of me would never go back. It was fun back in the day, and if someone said, "Hey, Ron, for grins and giggles, let's go do a performance gig," man, I would do it. But at the same time, would I do it professionally? There's just something about security. I just really enjoy it, and the other thing about security as well is I think you see the benefits of it so quickly. It's just a header change. You see them fix that header, and boom, you already know that app is more secure. It seems like in the performance area of things, you don't see those types of changes quite so quickly. There seems to be a lot more hoops, a lot more hurdles to jump through. So for that reason, I really like the security side of things.
Well, cool. And I'm glad that you have found your sweet spot. I want to just get your feedback on this last question. It's just a off the cuff remark. I heard a prediction for 2023 from the CEO of a company called Cribble talking about he thinks that there is going to be this year a ransomware attack that's bigger than anything we've seen thus far. And it's probably these ransomware attacks for 2023 are going to cost more than all natural disasters around the globe for the whole year. Would you agree with that? Knowing what you see on your side, could you see that happening?
I do see that happening, and I saw that article, and I also saw another article because it's like with YouTube, whatever else, you watch this thing and it ends up leaking you to another, and we see that with articles as well. The next article I saw said that more tape drives were sold than hard drives. People are so anticipating these types of attacks that they're doing slow, old school, big tape archives of their data so they can just literally restore that stuff from tape instead of having to deal with ransom attacks. So you already see some shifting and changing because there is anticipation of that.
Interesting. I'm going to go have to find some big 5-inch floppies drives and put them in my Commodore 64 and get prepared. Put them in my 1950s bunker underneath my house. I've got those JPEGs though.
We thought the tape robot was dead, but when I read that, I kind of inside I'm like, wow, we're literally talking about the resurrection of tape robots again, and it kind of blew my mind. I was like, we're going to go to this huge format medium, but it's slow, super slow, but it gives me stability. And that's literally where businesses are at. We're so freaked out about these kind of attacks. I'd rather know that within a couple of days I can restore everything than have to pay out a bunch of money to ransom stuff.
Well, listen, I really hope that we can bring you back on the show as sort of when we talk about security and we need a correspondent or we need some help, or if I get on a ransomware attack, I'm going to be calling you. So we'll have you back on the show. And if you got some other stuff that you want to talk about, we'd love to have you back on the show, as well as talk about what's going on at Saltworks. And so hopefully that'll be in the future. But thanks so much, Ron, for being on the show today.
Oh, anytime, man. And, like you said, we've been friends for a long time. It feels like we're just hanging out again.
Cool. Well, let's do it more often. Sometimes shows just turn into more of a family reunion. I've just known Ron so long. I really do appreciate him being on the show. So what do you think? Is Performant Code and Secure Code mutually exclusive? How well do they work together, in your opinion? I'd like to know what you think. I'm accessible to you through many social networking platforms, including LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, just to name a few, or you can scan that QR code to see an entire list on the bio page. If you're too lazy to do that, you can also email me at my new email address, heyscott@smcjournal.com. Would love to hear your feedback about that. If you did enjoy this video, maybe click the like button on the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's the link information on your screen right now. And that would be great to help me train that YouTube algorithm to do what we want it to do. Thanks again for watching today's show. For this episode of the SMC Journal podcast, I'm Scott Moore. Bye-bye.